Hi, I'm Lisa, and welcome back. In this video, I discuss the connection between typology and Jung's visionary and psychological mode of creativity. So I decided to go with a PowerPoint presentation in this video because the editing in After Effects forever. So let's see how this goes. So Jung and intuition, considering the visionary and psychological mode of creativity within Jung's typology. So I would suggest watching my previous video on the visionary and psychological mode of creativity before listening to this one. But let's begin. So what is intuition? So, the well-known French philosopher Henri Bergson spoke of two opposing ways of acquiring knowledge, which he labelled intellection and intuition. This idea is highlighted in his text The Creative Mind, published in 1934. Within it, he writes, intellection refers to science and mechanic art, which have to do with pure intellect, whereas intuition is rooted in metaphysics. So Bergson viewed intelligence and instinct as opposing characteristics which needed to be analysed for us to move beyond the confines of modernity. So for Bergson, instinct is the unconscious form of inner knowledge, while intuition is the instincts becoming conscious. This is a very interesting way of putting it, I think. Intuition is the instincts becoming conscious. So this text, Jung and Intuition by Nathalie Pillard. In this text, Nathalie Pillard shows us that intuition exists at the core of Jung's psychology. She suggests that it is central to his concept of the archetypes as well as his understanding of the unconscious. So she also brings attention to his use of the word underconscious from his 1902 essay called Occult Phenomena. And she describes this as the realm of paranormal intuition which exists in the intermediate region between unconsciousness and consciousness. So I do have a quote here. So what she says exactly is, Jung's underconscious is synonymous with Pierre Janet's subconscious. The fact there is an in-between state between unconscious and consciousness is of importance for us because only this state allows the most extraordinary forms of intuition. So Jung's typology. So in Psychological Types, collected work 6, Jung describes his understanding of the human typology. Within it, he differentiates between 8 typological groups, two personality attitudes, introversion and extroversion, and their corresponding functions of thinking, sensation, intuition, and feeling. So he then divided these 4 functions again, stating that thinking and feeling are rational, whereas sensation and intuition are irrational. The rational portrays thoughts, feelings, and actions that are reasonable, and they are based on objective values which are established through practical experience and, I suppose, life experience. He describes the rational attitude which permits us to declare objective values as valid at all is not the work of the individual subject, but the product of human history. The laws of reason are the laws that designate and govern the average, correct, adapted attitude. So the irrational function. In contrast to the rational function, the irrational function is the term given to the sensation and intuitive functions as they were not grounded in reason. Jung describes, I use this term not as denoting something contrary to reason, but something beyond reason. So these functions are directed to the perception of chance and is a phenomenon of nature which breaks through human order. Irrational functions and creativity. Jung states, the creative urge which finds its clearest expression in art is irrational and will in the end make a mockery of all our rationalistic undertakings. He also states that creative fantasy, which is an element of the visionary mode of creativity, is an irrational, instinctive function which alone has the power to supply the will with a content of such a nature that it unites the opposites. So these statements imply that creativity is rooted in the sensation and intuitive functions which are irrational. So, sensation. Jung describes, sensation is the psychological function that mediates the perception of physical stimuli. It is therefore identical with perception. It is on the one hand an element of ideation, since it conveys to the mind the perceptual image of the external object. And on the other hand, it is an element of feeling, since through the perception of bodily changes, it gives feeling the character of an effect. So again, he differentiates between concrete and abstract sensation. Concrete sensation. He describes this as always mixed up with feelings and thoughts. The concrete sensation of a flower conveys the perception not only of the flower as such, but also of the stem, leaves, habitat, and so on. It is instantly mingled with feelings of pleasure or dislike which the sight of the flower evokes. So an example of this is, in my opinion, botanical art, which is art that refers to configurations which are always scientifically and botanically correct, but not necessarily complete. An ideal example can be seen in the work of Mariana North, who is a prolific English Victorian biologist and botanical artist known for her plant and landscape paintings. So here it is. So this oil painting is an accurate and colourful depiction of plant life in its natural habitat. It is clear and definable and an example of concrete sensation. Abstract sensation, however, is characterised by an individual's unique selection of the most prominent and sensuous characteristics. Jung describes, its brilliant redness, for instance, makes this the sole or at least the principal of content of consciousness, entirely detached from other admixtures. So an artist that engages with the psychological function of abstract sensation observes an object and selects, highlights, or rearranges prominent features. This can be seen in the early work of Hilma af Klint, who originally created botanical art, which then evolved into more abstract paintings. So this next image is titled On the Viewing of Flowers and Trees, and within this configuration the artist is disregarding the scientifically correct depiction of a flower and is instead highlighting the brilliant red colour and oval shape. So we know that this image is inspired by a flower for the title, which is On the Viewing of Flowers and Trees. I suppose another example of this type of art would be G. O'Keeffe, who created abstracted paintings which were fundamentally inspired by plant life and landscapes. So we can determine that this is in this category because the external world acts as a starting point of inspiration. So sensation and the psychological mode of creativity. So there is a correlation between sensation and the psychological mode of creativity. So the psychological mode highlights the important experiences and gives us a greater depth of human insight by making us aware of everyday happenings which we generally overlook. Jung describes the psychological mode as the raw material of this kind of creation is derived from the contents of man's conscious life, from his eternally repeated joys and sorrows, but clarified and transfigured by the poet. So intuition. So Jung used the term intuition to signify the psychological function that recognizes the possibilities in the present. He describes, intuition gives outlook and insight. It revels in the garden of magical possibilities as if it were real. So he further describes it as, in intuition, a content presents itself whole and complete without our being able to explain or discover how this content came into existence. Intuition is a kind of instinctive apprehension. No matter what contents, intuitive knowledge possesses an intrinsic certainty and conviction. So like sensation, Jung differentiated between concrete and abstract intuition. Concrete intuition, he describes, mediates perception concerned with the actuality of things. It is a reactive process since it responds directly to give facts. This form includes objectivity and refers to the perception of data dependent on subliminal perceptions of the object and the feelings they evoke. So the psychological function of concrete intuition can be seen most prominently in the work of surrealist painters. So if surrealism was a cultural movement known most for its juxtaposition of uncommon imagery, and artists of this type created strange creatures from everyday objects and unusual scenes by combining and rearranging familiar items in odd ways. An example is In the Night Garden by Dorothea Tannen. This image is rooted in concrete intuition because it is dependent on the subliminal perception of an environment and attempts to highlight the feeling of fear and doubt by referencing elements in the external world. So there is a nice quote Tannen is noted for saying in reference to this painting. At night, one imagines all sorts of happenings in the shadows of the darkness. A hotel bedroom is both intimate and unfamiliar, almost alienation, and this can conjure a feeling of menace and unknown forces at play. But these unknown forces are a projection of our own imaginations, our own private nightmares. So abstract intuition. Jung describes, abstract intuition mediates perceptions of ideational connections and needs a certain element of direction, an act of will or aim. This function is subjective and refers to the perception of unconscious psychic data originating from the subject. Configurations that are inspired by abstract intuition appear drastically different from surreal works. With this type, the artist depends on expressive and intuitive depictions of their inner world, strictly avoiding any reference to elements from the outside world. With this type, the artist depends on expressive and intuitive depictions of their inner world, strictly avoiding any reference to the external world. Okay, bit of a double trouble there. Okay, an example of this is Lee Krasner's Eager. So it's very expressive, and you definitely cannot see any reference to the external world there. So I would like to bring attention back to Hilma F. Klint, whose geometric paintings symbolise harmony through abstraction and abstract intuition. So her series Paintings for the Temple. Works of this type with the emphasis on geometry, depict emotional and psychic elements through abstraction and symbolic content. It synthesizes conscious and unconscious elements by emphasizing formal convention, a rhythmic solemnity, and dominance of abstract geometric elements. So Newman describes how works of this type, he describes it as transcendence of art, and it is the depiction of symbolism whose ingredients are perfect form, balance, harmony, and solidity. So here is some of her work, Paintings for the Temples. So I suggest that intuition directly correlates with the visionary mode of creativity, so visionary mode forces itself upon the artist and brings its own form, reminding us of nighttime's fears as opposed to our experiences in everyday life. With this mode, the artist is overwhelmed by a flood of thoughts and images that they never intended to create, and which their own will could never have brought into being. So, yeah. Sensation, both abstract and concrete, refer to the psychological mode of creativity, and intuition, both concrete and abstract, refer to the visionary mode of creativity. So yeah, thanks for watching, and goodbye.